Thank you very much. I think we'll just go ahead and get started while others are still getting their coffee and coming in. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Wallace, and I'm a program manager in the financial inclusion team at the MasterCard Foundation. And for those who don't know us, the MasterCard Foundation is an independent private foundation established in 2006 when MasterCard Worldwide went public. And we're based in Toronto, Canada. And we fund programming in financial inclusion and also to support young people in their learning and entrepreneurship ambitions. First of all, I'd like to thank Making Sense for inviting me to moderate this plenary. We're very pleased to have a diverse group of participants here, and we're hoping that this will be a fairly interactive and lively session. So first, and I'd also like to say that we are being webcast, so hello to everyone in the wider web world. So, and that also that we are taking questions on Twitter, and the information is on the live webcast. First of all, let me just introduce the panelists for this session. We're very delighted that everyone's been able to come and join us and share their experiences in understanding how to engage rural youth in entrepreneurship and livelihood development. Immediately to my left here is Jim Sundberg, and Jim is a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex University in the UK, and he's an agriculturalist by training, but he leads the Young People and Agri-Food, or co-leads Young People and Agri-Food theme in the Futures Agricultures Consortium. So welcome. Second, next to Jim, we have Catherine Boyce, who's the Chief Operating Officer of CamFed, and she's replacing Ann Cotton, who unfortunately couldn't be here. At CamFed, she supports their strategy for enterprise and leadership for rural young women. And so we're very delighted to have her here to share her experience. Next to Catherine, we have Maya Boutros, who's a director at the Arab Thought Foundation. And Maya comes to us from rural Lebanon. She's an agricultural engineer and has lots of experience in starting her own small business. And we're really looking forward to her engagement on this. And then finally, we have Andy McCormick, who's the Vice President of Hershey's. He's Vice President focusing on cocoa and sustainability, and he leads corporate social responsibility efforts and also sustainable and ethical sourcing. So we've got a wide variety of viewpoints here, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion. Just a little word about how we're going to structure the next hour and a half. First thing we're going to do is do some feedback from a deep dive on rural youth and rural youth entrepreneurship and employment opportunities that a number of us participated in yesterday morning that was organized by Making Sense. So about 25 participants came together to think through what are some of the key challenges, resource gaps, evidence base, and principles that we need to use to focus on for developing programming for rural youth. We're then going to do a series of discussions on different points, looking at some of the key issues for supporting rural young people in their entrepreneurship and employment ambitions and how to support them best. And then we are going to have a Q&A at the end. If anyone has a really burning issue, though, to make this a little more interactive, feel free to come up and ask a question at the microphone. So without any further ado, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll just jump on in. So as I mentioned yesterday, a number of us did what was called a rural deep dive, where we all came together and really thought through some of the issues related to the principles, the challenges, the resource gaps, and the evidence base that is needed to do and improve programming for rural youth. I'd like to share out just some of the key highlights. And also in that deep dive, we spoke about some of the work that the foundation is doing, particularly to help ensure that the voice of young people is included in the programming that we do. And we were fortunate enough to hear from one of the members of one of our initiatives, which is the Youth Think Tank, which is a group of 8 young people who engage in a number of our projects, and they've been trained in participatory research methods to find out and understand what young people are hearing, what they're thinking, what their perceptions are, and what they think about our programming. And so we heard from Ernest Sabumba, and his essay is the lead essay in the Innovations Journal. So I welcome everybody to read that when you have time. And he's a member of the Youth Think Tank from Uganda, who has his own farm and has started his NGO to help encourage young people to engage more in agriculture. And one of the key issues that came out in the deep dive is that there's a real perception about agriculture and farming, particularly amongst rural youth, and particularly in Africa. There's a general lack of knowledge about agribusiness, and when things are framed in the voice of agribusiness, there's much more interest in engaging by young people and in engagement there. But when we speak about farming, there's still a very negative perception of farming. And some of the work that I think we need to do is to try to help change that perception. There also are a lot of job opportunities that are available and are in the rural areas that are outside and supportive of the farming sector. And the more that young people have found out about that, the more they're interested in engaging on this. And just to mention as well, our Youth Think Tank report, we have one report that's available on our website, and then we're going to be doing a second report focusing specifically on agribusiness that will be coming out fairly shortly. So some of the key highlights that we found in the deep dive were, one of our challenges that we have as practitioners is we very much talk about rural youth as a big group. We need to get very specific about which youth, what their needs are, where, in which context. And some of the key issues that face each of them will be very different depending on if they're male or female, what their income levels are, their age divide, as well as just how far out they are in rural areas. Another key theme that came out yesterday was the need to take a very holistic market perspective. So we need to understand the financial ecosystem, the economic ecosystem, and we need to ensure that we engage appropriately with public and private sector partners when we're doing our programming. A third key theme that came through and is very much a part of the Foundation's DNA is using youth in the design and participation throughout the programming cycle. And that's why we've set up the Youth Think Tank to help inform us, and we encourage others to do the same. And without any further discussion on those issues, what I'd like to do is now just turn to have a broader discussion about rural youth and some of their opportunities and challenges and what we can do to help learn from programming efforts. And so I'm going to turn to Jim. And so first of all, what in your mind are the key challenges facing development practitioners and policymakers working with young people in rural areas who are trying to start their own businesses?
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to stand up if that's all right. I'd like to start my response to Lindsay's question by testing two propositions with you this morning. And I'm going to frame these propositions in terms of young people, agriculture, and sub-Saharan Africa, because those are the three touchstones of a major part of our work through the Future Agricultures Consortium. So what I'd like to do is to just raise your hand after each of the two propositions if you agree with it. So here we go, first proposition. In general, young people from rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa would be better off if they remained in the rural areas and engaged in farming or food activities. Let's have a show of hands who generally agrees with that. Come on, don't be shy. Okay, and now a second proposition. One of the major challenges facing practitioners is to persuade or convince young people that they should indeed stay in rural areas. Anybody agrees? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that. That's very useful. A number of years ago, there was a very popular film about American baseball called A Field of Dreams. And I'm sure many of you have seen it, or if you haven't, you probably know something about it. And if you retain anything from that film, you'll probably retain knowledge of a little phrase that's repeated throughout the film, and which has kind of taken on in the subsequent years a life of its own. And that phrase goes like this: if you build it, he will come. If you build it, he will come. In the film, the it is a baseball park or a baseball field, and the he is a local baseball hero. Now, I'm going to put my cards on the table very quickly this morning, so you don't have to try to figure out where I'm coming from here. So in relation to young people, agriculture, or agri-food more broadly, and Africa, I'm very much of the if we build it, some will come school. If we build it, some will come. And the it I'm referring to is a viable, attractive agricultural sector. Okay? And when I say attractive, what I mean is attractive in the broadest way. Remunerative, good pay, reasonable status, the ability to generate resources, different kinds of resources, so that young people can start to build a livelihood and get on with their life. Okay, so attractive in the broadest sense. Where do I want to go with this now? So, to make agriculture attractive, we're talking about really quite important and fundamental structural changes compared to the kinds of agriculture we see in Africa now. Structural change which is not going to take place this week, this month, or this year. It's a long-term proposition. And I think that's one important part of the answer to Lindsay's question is we have to realize what kind of a long-term road we're on. Now, I'm not suggesting because we need structural change, we shouldn't be worried about and thinking about programming that we can do today focused around rural people in Africa, rural people in agriculture. But what I am suggesting is that we have to be much more nuanced, more subtle, and more realistic about how we go about that programming. And that's really the point I want to, the major take-home message I want to convey this morning. And I can sum this up by saying difference matters. Difference matters. We have to keep that in mind all the time. And I'll just illustrate this with reference to difference in 3 domains. So the first element of difference that we have to pay attention to is difference in rural areas. We all know rural areas are different, and we can classify them in all kinds of different ways. But 2 dimensions which I think are particularly important are in terms of the quality of natural resources. So what kinds of soil, what's the rainfall pattern, irrigation water, and so on. And also nearness to markets, how accessible are markets or how close to urban markets are the rural areas. So if we start to think about rural areas in terms of both quality of natural resources and access to markets, we quickly have quite a powerful framework that helps us explain in the first instance why it is that we see certain kinds of activities in certain areas and not other activities. But it's also a powerful framework that helps us think about what kinds of activities and what kinds of processes might be possible in a particular rural area. So intensification, for example, might be an interesting proposition in certain kinds of rural areas, but not in others. And in our programming, we have to be very clear about what kinds of rural areas are we working in. Difference matters. Difference also matters in terms of types of employment. I think those of us, particularly those of us who have a job, and when we think about rural unemployed or underemployed people, we tend to think that, well, any job is better than no job, isn't it? But in fact, we know now that that's not true. People make choices, and young people, particularly young people with rising aspirations and all kinds of new connections to the world, aren't satisfied with just any job. One of the things we did in our little contribution to the Innovations Journal that was distributed yesterday is we proposed a little framework for thinking about jobs and thinking about different kinds of work in rural areas. So we can think about some jobs in agriculture which really just let people keep their heads above water. We can think of some jobs that let people not only keep their heads above water, but start to accumulate capital. And other kinds of jobs where they accumulate capital and also start to engage in much broader social transformational processes. I put it to you that if we're going to get young people to be attracted to agriculture, as opposed to having to convince them and persuade them, we have to be working on jobs and job opportunities that are at the far end of that spectrum, i.e. jobs and work that allows for capital accumulation and that allows people to at least open up the door to participating in and facilitating social transformational processes. The last little element of differentiation, of course, is, or where difference matters, is in our thinking about the young people themselves. And here I think our language often gets in the way. It's one of our biggest obstacles. We talk about young people. We talk about youth. We talk about the youth. And we do it over and over again to the point where I think we all start to assume that the youth, everybody in that box, is a homogeneous category. They have the same desires. They have the same needs. They have the same skills. They have the same aspirations and the same access to resources. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing could be farther from the truth. And of course, those differences in skills and aspiration and access to resources all relate to social differences. Gender, age, even within youth, class, kinship networks, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. All of which determine who's able to take advantage of particular opportunities in particular places and who is not. Difference matters. And if we, in general, target youth, we're likely to get nowhere. So let me just finish this little story by saying that difference matters, and I want to suggest that unless we start to take difference in those dimensions really much more seriously, the chances of our programming being successful, especially being successful at the scale that we need it to be, are really very small. I want to make one little point about evidence. It's fair to say, I think, that the policy and funder and practitioner interest in the whole problem of young people, agriculture, and Africa, and probably young people and agriculture more broadly, the interest in doing things and doing stuff and trying to address the problem has far outstripped the evidence base. We actually don't know very much about what works under what conditions. And that's a real problem. How are we developing our programs? What's informing our policy? And there's a real need, therefore, to start to backfill that gap in the evidence base. Now, I'm not one who believes that necessarily more or better evidence will guarantee more or better policy or better programming. Policy and programming come about through complex processes. Evidence is part of that, but politics and ideology and institutional mandates and imperatives also matter. So while there's no guaranteed direct link between better evidence and better policy, we can be pretty sure that without better evidence, it's unlikely we're going to get better policy and better programming. So there's a need for all of us to work on this. And I think yesterday in the deep dive and in some of the talks yesterday afternoon, there's a recognition of the need to become much more serious about the evidence. Now, working through our Future Agricultures Consortium, we're in the process of launching what we hope will be a major initiative to start to put in place a much stronger, much deeper, much richer evidence base about what works in terms of agriculture, young people, and Africa. And when I'm saying what works, given what I've already said about difference, we really have to frame the question in this way: in what kinds of rural areas and for what social groups of young people is there evidence that such and such works? So incorporating that difference, the idea of difference, really centrally in the whole idea of evidence. I have a little bit of material about this initiative, and I would be more than happy to talk to anybody who would be at all interested in engaging with this in any way whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. There's lots of food for thought there. Just building on the idea of difference, I'm going to turn to Catherine and just wondering what are you seeing with CanFed's work on focusing specifically on rural women? And I think, in terms of the difference, the gender difference is probably one of the most significant. So what are you seeing with regards to the specific challenges for rural young women in Africa, and how can education play an important role in that?
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, I think I'd like to start just by recognizing what an achievement it is for a young woman from a rural community in Africa to complete secondary school. If you think about the challenges she's overcome to do that, the long distances she's walked to school, the negotiation with her parents and guardians to avoid early marriage, which would bring some income into the family, the negotiation and juggling of the household responsibilities that particularly fall to girls, alongside doing homework in a context where perhaps you have no lighting in order to study in the evening, and learning in a school where resources are very scarce and trained teachers are few. To actually complete secondary school in this context is a remarkable achievement. And young women coming out of secondary school are rightly very proud of that achievement. And they may be the first women in their families to have completed secondary school. They will have high expectations of themselves. And they tell us their families have high expectations of them as well. They feel a responsibility, not a burden, but a responsibility that they're proud to embrace to support their families. But as we all know, they're coming out into a very, very difficult context. They would love to get a job, but where are the jobs in the rural communities? In the countries where we work, in the rural communities, you're talking about underemployment rates exceeding 90%. Many people are employed in agriculture, but for the majority of young women in agriculture, it's not paid at all. So while it can be an attractive career option, if you're not getting any income from it, obviously it doesn't look very attractive. You would love to become a job creator. I think this is something we were talking about yesterday, become a job creator rather than a job seeker. But you need capital to do that, and banks are unlikely to lend to young women without a credit history. MFIs actually don't often penetrate the very remote locations that we're talking about. And even if they do, the women themselves tell us they have a real fear around debt. Having grown up in a context where money is so straitened and there's so much tension around money within the family, there's a real nervousness about taking on board that debt. And there's also a sense of isolation, a lack of role models that can inspire you, a lack of diversification in the business sector that can inspire you, and a lack of information about networks and connections that can help you set up a business and really bring it to fruition. So it's a very challenging context, and many young women that we work with would find themselves in that context, seeing only two choices before them. One is to marry, one is to migrate. Migration in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're migrating from a position of weakness and an absence of choice, then it makes you very vulnerable. There's a practice quite common in the northern regions of Ghana. It's called going for kayayo. Kayayo is street portering. The young woman would go to the city, and she would live on the street, and she would porter, so carry items from place to place and be paid by the piece. Sleeping on the street, she's incredibly vulnerable, as you can imagine, to sexual exploitation and abuse. One chief, I remember, remarked to Camfed, if a girl returns from the city, she comes with a child or with death. It's a very bleak prospect. So this isn't about just thinking about all the problems. This is also about thinking about the solutions. And I think what we heard from Abigail Kandu yesterday in the opening plenary was about the energy that young people have and the passion they have to seize every opportunity that exists. And the way CamFed is tackling this is to provide a continuum of support. Education is absolutely critical as a foundation from which young people can succeed, and that's our starting point. But then it's helping young women to manage that transition, coming out of secondary school into that context. First and foremost, it's about helping young women to keep themselves safe. Safe in the sense of sexual and reproductive health, awareness, knowledge of their rights and what they're entitled to and how they can protect themselves, and safe in terms of being able to build some economic self-sufficiency, whether that's through setting up a micro business or and complementing that with financial education so they can manage the limited resources they have. But there's another aspect to this continuum as well, and I think this is in a way where the potential for remarkable change resides, and that's about helping the young women through the CAMA network, which is a peer support network of young women across Africa, now with 19,550 members, helping those young women to actually be leaders of change in their communities. And CamFed does this through a number of ways, through supporting access to tertiary with our many partners, including the MasterCard Foundation. We do it through helping young women to advocate about the challenges they see in their communities. And we also do it by helping young women to step up from businesses that are just self-sufficient to businesses that are growth-orientated and businesses that really do help those young women to become job creators. And I just want to talk briefly about a pilot CamFed has been running now for 3 years with support from the MasterCard Foundation. It's called our Innovation Bursary Program. We've been working now with 58 young women from Ghana for 3 years. And what we wanted to do is to see how we could help young women to make that bridge between running a micro business which puts food on the table for themselves and sort of keeps them just off, sort of starvation, just enough to eat, to something that actually is going to create lasting benefits for themselves and in their communities. One of the challenges we'll be aware of is the lack of economic diversification in many communities in rural Africa. We worked with Said Business Schools to do some research on this, and a survey of 128 businesses in 2 communities in Zambia, Samfya and Mapika. We found that of the 128 businesses, 90% were spread across only 6 different categories. Of those 6 categories, 5 related to the sale of groceries. So there's a real dearth of diversification. And the other real challenge we found was that young women themselves were very risk averse, and for understandable reasons. We trialed sort of introducing new business ideas in some of the really exciting new technologies and sectors that we're aware of, for example, food processing, IT-related technologies, solar power, solar lighting, clean cook stoves. And we really didn't find there was much take-up of these ideas, and we wanted to understand why. And so we worked with a Zambian researcher, Dr. Langowe Metakala, to do some qualitative research into this and to explore the reasons why. And the biggest reason we heard was fear, actually. When you're living on the edge of subsistence, it is just too terrifying to take that bridge into a business that you just don't know if it's going to succeed. And so we wanted our initiative to help bridge these challenges for young women. It starts with identifying a remarkable young woman who really has the entrepreneurial flair. One thing we've learned over the 3 years is that's probably the most critical thing, is someone who's passionate about business and really wants to make a success of it. And we put that together with internships that build her technical expertise, with one-on-one mentoring from a person from her country who has expertise in that area, with support from business development manager within CamFed, and with connections that rural young women wouldn't usually have. So a chance to meet the business registrar's department, for example, and representatives of rural financing initiatives. One of the young women who was selected for this program, her name's Balkisu Idrisu. She's the CEO of Bafafa Foods. She's one of 19 children in her family. Her father was polygamous, so he had 3 wives, and she was the 9th born of her father's third wife. So by the time she came out of school, her mother was actually very old, and she had a responsibility to care for her mother. And she went through that entry-level business training program that I mentioned, our seed money program. She received a small grant, about $50, and she set up a rice retail business. And she would sit in the marketplace in Tamale in northern Ghana for the week, and she would sell the equivalent of 10 big bowls of rice. And she'd make a margin of perhaps 10%, which was enough for her to feed her family and her mother. And, as she said, I didn't know there was anything wrong with the business I was doing because I was making enough to eat, And that was a lifeline for her. That was how she described it. Having gone through this program, she has moved into a business which really has added value. So she's processing cereals. She has brought in some great packaging for her products. She has secured a contract with a supermarket. And this is a young woman who said she'd never before, going on this program, even venture to step foot into a supermarket because she didn't think that those kind of shops were for the likes of her, is how she described it. And she now has a contract with a supermarket. And she's employing 2 women from her village in her business. She has a husband of her choice, who she loves talking about, and she has 2 wonderful children who are educated and going through school, and she's supporting them. And, I think her story, Balkisu's story, really it says it all for us. So it's been a wonderful pilot. We're working with 58 women on this pilot, and we really want to look at how we can take it to scale.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think at this point I just want to ask if anybody in any of our participants have any particular reflections upon the importance. I think you've both pointed out the importance of difference, to use your phrase, Jim. The difference in terms of types of jobs, and looking at it as a continuum, as well as the very important differences within young people themselves. Any comments?
Just kind of a gem on your build it, they will come. I think the nuance is who builds it, right? I think that there's a lot in there, and obviously programs that are done organically and locally and by the local folks probably have a better chance of attracting than a brilliant idea but imposed from the outside.
Maybe, but I think we have to also separate out some when there's structural issues within a sector. So, for example, there could be a structural issue around access to land that can't be sorted out at the local level. So we have to distinguish between local initiatives that work within a context and initiatives that may have to happen at a much higher level, which fundamentally change the context. That's the distinction I was trying to make.
Thank you. And Maya, I think it would be wonderful if we could hear from you, first of all, about your experience, your background and the work that you're doing in Lebanon. And then also just to give us your perspective on what are the challenges that young people are facing in terms of trying to engage in entrepreneurial activities in the agricultural sector, based on your experience. And also, if you could speak a little bit about how best we as practitioners should engage young people in the design of our work and make sure that they're part of the entire process.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to talk about my experience. I was raised up as a farmer. I come originally from not a rural areas, I would say it's semi-rural areas. And fortunate enough, I was able to get enough education, and I had a lot of support from my parents' side. When I was about to choose my educational specialization, I would say I was a little bit influenced by my parents' not decision, but they kind of influenced my choice. And given that my elder brother and sisters, they already chose different field of education, that was a little bit far away from agriculture. My parents saw in me as the youngest one at home, sort of their solution to kind of keep our attachment to the field and the land. So I decided to be an agriculture engineer, and it took me 5 years to become an agriculture engineer, and throughout I had to travel, not to travel, but to move to the city to get the education in this field. While in the city, I got an opportunity to work in a completely different field, which is an NGO, it's Arab Food Foundation, and although I got involved with youth work and conferencing and organizing and event management, I sort of, at a certain point, felt that I wasted my 5 years in education, and felt that I need to do something about, at least to profit from those 5 years. It was then I decided to open an agricultural pharmacy in my village, and we have a lot of farmers there, and we're known as in culture, we have a lot of olive trees. It's our main culture there. And when I opened the pharmacy, it was somehow the trend. I was still following up the agricultural news, and it was a trend of organic agriculture. I took the initiative in our own land to use organic fertilizers and ensure that the products and the olive oil was somehow at a higher quality and produced as organic oil. What I did, that I encouraged some farmers when they saw that using the organic fertilizers would not affect their crops and the quality of the production. They sort of were encouraged to do the same and use the organic fertilizers. And it kind of one farmer and another, they started to use this process and this method. Then we had a small co-op in the village. At the end, we sort of won the best oil in the country, and it was a big achievement for us. However, if I look back at, I would say, challenges and opportunities for youth in the rural areas, and given my experience that I sort of migrated from the rural areas, then it was a reverse migration somehow. One of the main challenges, I would say, would be, in my opinion, the influence of the parents and how they can they raise a high expectations out of their children. Some of the parents would see their children sort of helpers or workers who can help them in the field. Others would seek better opportunities for their children. So it depends, but at least in the villages and the rural areas, the family environment still somehow influence the youth decision whenever they decide to seek their ambitions or their dreams. One of the other challenges I can see is now although we won the best olive quality oil in Lebanon, now we're facing a problem in exporting and selling the products. Somehow during my current work at Arab Thought helped me in selling some of the products, giving my network and the people you meet in the city. But it's not enough to kind of sell all the products in the village. So the selling and the plan for exporting your products and putting a full business plan was a little bit. I didn't know that I have to think about it prior to now, but at least with my experience, I'm trying now to find a solution, and we're trying even to seek some source to export our products outside Lebanon. Another challenge would be that I was fortunate enough to have some technical experience in agriculture, and I kind of shared it with my peers in the village. However, because I'm sort of now I'm working with them and I'm listening to them, it is a little bit awkward, or I feel I'm privileged enough that I had the access to education, the access to network and meet people. But when you listen to them, you feel how some people are really, I will not say lacking behind, but they didn't have any opportunity. They don't know about what's new in the field, what's going on in the market. So they kind of sound surprised a little bit when you talk about, let's say, organic agriculture. No, they don't know about it. They don't have the culture. Nobody is kind of informing them about what's new on the market. So it was a little bit hard at the beginning to convince them. But I guess one of the main strong points I had, that I was one of them, and I was. It's my community. They know us. They know me as well, and they kind of had this trust with me. However, whenever an expert, or let's say somebody stranger for them, would come and do, let's say, a seminar or workshop to advise or help them, you can feel that they don't trust him, or they see him as, who's this guy who's coming and just lecturing us here. So I think that trust is a very important point when you want to approach people. You have to speak their language. You have to know what their concerns are. As for the the second part of the question about how we can better engage youth. And I guess it's very important whenever you're making a policy, you're planning a program or a project. It's very important to include youth from the very early ages, whether in the research, whether in the program or the planning. Because as I said, they feel that they are empowered first, and they are being engaged in something that is planned for their better life and betterness in the future. So they need to know what are you planning for them, and you need also to listen to their language and listen what they are saying, what are their concerns. Because as funders or as researchers or planners, we sort of always have this different perception or different point of view on how to look at things. And always the beneficiaries themselves, they always have mainly one concern, which is to get more income maybe, or to get a better life, or to get new experience. However, when you look at the funders, they would say what is in it for us. Mm-hmm. So they always look for themselves. So that's why it's important to listen to engage everyone in the planning process. On a personal level, if I would be asked now if I would leave my work at Arab Thought Foundation and go back to my to my village and stay there for forever, I would say no. And one of my main challenges, because I know I have been exposed throughout these years, and there is a lot of risk in agricultural businesses. First is a seasonal source of income. So especially when it comes to fruit trees or certain crops, it's not monthly income, or you kind of have a lot of risk, whether it's the weather conditions, you have the disease conditions also. So it's a little bit risky to kind of count on one source of income nowadays. That's why I would say I would stay in my current state. I sort of ensure that I have a stable income, a source of income, and I would look at the agriculture somehow as an additional source of income. So that's it.
Very helpful. I don't know if anyone has any additional comments to add. I just actually have one question. I'd be interested to know what your peers thought when you came back and started the farm, or decided to work on the farm.
At the beginning, it was a little bit strange, and they kind of I felt that they not encourage me. They didn't trust what I'm doing. So they said, it's not gonna last. The pharmacy is not gonna last. She's doing this just to make some profit. However, when they started to come and buying my products and asking about advice, I don't charge for those advice or technical advice. So they kind of felt more comfortable, and even, they sort of keep on calling me even on Sundays mornings, weekends. So they kind of know that I'm up there in the village, and they are, I would say, encouraged a little bit because I would give an example that one of the method I use for in the organic process, that we plant certain crops, green peas, throughout a certain period of time, and it kind of enrich the land in certain fertilizers. So I started this initiative by myself, and I bought to the pharmacy those seeds. And when they saw that I'm doing this in my own land, they also started to do it, because it was for them another source of income. Mm-hmm. They sell the green peas themselves. So it needed just to take the initiative and set an example in front of them, and the trust was built throughout the years.
Great. Thank you very much. And turning to Andy from Hershey's, actually one of my favorite companies. How are you, as a private sector company, how are you looking at young people and agriculture, the role that young people can play in securing your supply chain going forward. As we know, there's a big issue in the cocoa sector about aging farmers, and just be interested to hear from your perspective, how you would be addressing some of these issues.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks to Making Sense and to you for hosting us, and we're pleased to be here. And I want to quickly caveat my remarks by, we're not in the development business. We don't claim to have the expertise that you all have, and we work with many great people in NGOs who have this expertise. But I thought I would give you a little bit of a company's perspective on these very important issues. And I thought I'd begin by, we're about 2 hours up the road in Pennsylvania, in the cornfields of Pennsylvania, a small town in Pennsylvania. And the importance of that is our founder was a guy named Milton Hershey, and he kind of invented chocolate, mass market chocolate. But he and his wife couldn't have children, so in around 1915 he started what was then an orphanage. And today he set up a trust, and we're owned by the trust. And about 2,000 low-income kids from about 30 states get K through 12 housing there. And it's a great place. It's Milton Hershey School if you're interested in it. But the reason I reference that is we, as a company, tend to think about issues from kids and kids at risk is kind of our filter there. And we buy about 2/3 of our cocoa beans, as do others, Mars and Nestle and Mondelez, buy about 2/3 of the cocoa from West Africa, because you have to grow cocoa on the equator within a certain variance, and they are the leaders. Cocoa in West Africa is the primary cash crop for many families. So cash from cocoa can pay for books, can pay for medicine, can pay for food crop. It's a very important crop, but it's a very challenged crop because it's about 2 million cocoa farmers in West Africa, so they're small farmers. They can't take advantage of scale that we see in agriculture, and particularly in this country, so that's definitely an issue. And the amount of land, arable land, new land, is decreasing with population growth, et cetera. So Hershey's view on all these challenges is one that they need to be addressed in a thoughtful way, and not by a company or an industry, but by a company, by an industry, with the Cocoa Board of Ghana, with the CCC in the Côte d'Ivoire, with NGOs. So we definitely adopt at the macro level kind of a multi-tier approach with the public and private partners. Our particular insight in the last 3 or 4 years has been how powerful technology can be in addressing and leading to some actually very personalized solutions to some complex problems. So I'll give you a couple examples. In about 2008, about 5% of cocoa farmers had access to a phone through a landline, very limited. And we believe by 2015, it'll be 95% will have either a cell phone, a mobile phone, or access to one of those two. So just incredible revolution in communications occurring in this region. Where we see that being helpful is to take a lot of the great information about improving planning, spacing, fertilizing, social issues on spraying fertilizers or pesticides, insecticides, or information about loads that children should carry. There's a lot of information that's useful and practical, just hasn't been getting to them. So we've been working with others on CocoaLink, which is a program to deliver it to them week by week in the local language. It's an SMS. Eventually it will be voice. Eventually they will migrate to smartphones. So we see that as a very disruptive technology. We see that as a very way for governments to stay honest. If an area is supposed to be sprayed and it hasn't been sprayed, they're going to hear about it. If there's a disease spreading through an area, the experts are going to hear about it in real time. So we're very excited about that, but vis-a-vis youth, the one thing that we hear in all our surveys is 2 words: aspiration and opportunity, and both being lacking. And one of the side effects of some of the technology programs is an exposure to the broader world, which is double-edged, obviously. But we do think that in our area, modernizing cocoa farming, will create more wealth, local wealth, will create more opportunities. So we do see that there's a lot of upside. It doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight.
Great, thank you very much. Just wondering if any of the other panelists wanted to comment on some of those points. I think the role of technology and the information sharing is so important, but I think it also adds to Maya's point about trust and who's actually giving that information and how open people are to receiving it. So any other? Yeah.
And Andy, I wonder if you would just explain a little bit about what I thought you heard you say, that aspiration was lacking. Are you, is the
we actually, and I don't want to put an ad out, but I will, workshop 3. We're going to talk about a education project in Western Ghana where Cisco donated what we call telepresence, which is a screen almost that size, to do a virtual learning with Ghanaian children and American children. And when we were talking to the teachers kind of before that, they were saying, look, unlike the American children who are exposed to all this media and so forth and so on, the children in Ghana typically have seen their villages and their families and their farming, but they haven't necessarily been exposed to opportunities beyond that world. So just being aware of the opportunities that are available through technologies is something new and different. And one other point I completely agree on the local agent and the person being trusted. Most of the technology programs are just, they're almost like a thought starter. They're not the program. They're just, they supplement, and so the community trainers who are trusted and selected by the local farming, they are the agent of change, and they will use the Cocoa Link messages to convene a meeting on planting or crop spacing. But so it's really not meant to replace any of the good work, merely to enhance it.
Great. I think at this point we're going to open the floor to questions, and also if people are watching us online, to feel free to send in your questions as well. There are 2 microphones down the middle here, so please feel free to line up, and yeah, we look forward to an interesting discussion. Oh, great, thanks. And if you could just maybe state your name and which organization you're with when you speak. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janet Barry, and I'm with World Education, with whom Andy's very familiar. We have a program with the Cocoa Links folks in Ghana and Ivory Coast. And my question really is about this trend towards reframing agriculture for youth. And I would love to hear more specifically if anybody has concrete examples of areas or places or programs where that has happened and sort of how that has taken off. Because I think where we're working now in high HIV prevalence countries in Southern and Eastern Africa, we're looking very closely at that, particularly with young people who are HIV affected or HIV infected, and they are staying in rural areas, not necessarily migrating, but looking at how we can transform the opportunity in agriculture to be much more sustainable and attractive to them.
Well, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that. I'm happy to add some comments from our side as well. But
I can say a few words.
Sure.
It may only partly answer your question, but I think what we're definitely hearing from young people is that agriculture isn't seen as an attractive career choice, and I think Jim's remarks reinforce that point. Yet the potential there is huge. It's possibly the biggest opportunity that exists in rural Africa. Land is this remarkably precious resource that exists. One of the things CAMFED is doing is actually exploring a partnership with Earth University in Costa Rica, which do training on sustainable agriculture. And it's actually with the MasterCard Foundation as well, and looking at how we can help to raise the status of agriculture for young people, to do so in a way that recognizes the skill and opportunity and the potential there is in agriculture, and then to think about the techniques that are really appropriate for feasible, given the constraints young people face in the communities where we work. Another thing CAMFED does is we actually work with what we call mother support groups They're groups of mothers in the rural communities, and they run initiatives where they feed children, because children are often very hungry at school. And we work with a local partner there in Zimbabwe. It's called Foundations for Farming. And what they do is they come to the community with us, and they actually train the mothers in small-scale agricultural techniques that really work in those communities. For example, how you can use manure as a fertilizer, how to very practical hands-on skills to tend the crops, a training that's really targeted at an audience that has low levels of literacy. So I think there's many sort of modest-scaled initiatives out there to really, I think, design programs that are really relevant to the challenging context in which young people are operating, and that also sort of raise the status of agriculture in those communities as well.
And just to add, we have a number of programs that we're supporting with various partners that are looking into and addressing this issue. I think about our partnership with TechnoServe under the STRIDE program, and I know that's going to be shared out later on, and that's very much about bringing young people together in groups, providing a lot of intensive life skills training, but also entrepreneurial training, and helping them to think differently. Because again, you know, when you think about agriculture, you just think about farming, and you think about the farming the way that your parents did farming. And so a lot of it is fairly intensive in terms of just engaging with them and thinking about, you know, farming as a business. But I think to add to Jim's point earlier, there isn't a huge amount of evidence yet on, you know, what works where for whom. So we're still building that up.
Could I add a little bit to that? I'm an agriculturalist. I'm really keen on agriculture. But I think we have to be realistic about this, and be honest about it. And we have to think also in the long term, because we're really talking about, there's one issue about what's going to happen, or what's the future for young people who are unemployed or seeking employment today. That's a real challenge, and we have to be worried about that. But the bigger prize is to think about the people who are coming down and getting older, or going to be potentially unemployed in 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. We have to be thinking of that time horizon already. And I think when we look around the world, is what's happened in the agricultural sector is that by and large, labor leaves the sector. So the agricultural sector, as it modernizes, doesn't absorb more labor in the production side, it sheds labor from the production side. So to think that the production part of agriculture is going to be a great sink that's going to provide opportunity and quality jobs is not realistic. On the other hand, where the jobs show up, as has been said, is in processing and catering and those sorts of things. But we also have to be clear that in this country and in Europe, those are not great jobs. The food and agriculture sector isn't, I mean, they're often low pay, they're often insecure, and so on and so forth. So we have to be, I think, quite realistic. And of course, they're also not oftentimes located in rural areas. So let's focus on agriculture, but let's be realistic, especially in the long term, of what the potential it has to provide the kinds of jobs that will satisfy young people's aspirations.
And where are the opportunities in the value chain that are realistic?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're looking at as opposed to improving farming practices. But what other areas can we look to along the value chain that are realistic for these kids, and what kind of skills they need, and who do we need to partner
Yep.
with?
Thank you. Mark? Sorry, yeah, do you want to just, well, just to follow up, she was basically just saying that, you know, what are the opportunities within the value chain? So we know it's not necessarily just going to be production, but it will be further along the value chain. I just want to point out that there was a gentleman in the deep dive yesterday who mentioned that in the US, so, you know, these statistics haven't been fact checked, but 2% of the population actually is involved in the production of food, but 25% are engaged in the food sector more broadly. So even though, you know, as an overall sector is still fairly large, but the actual production piece will be smaller. So thank you.
Hi, Mark Wensley from the MasterCard Foundation. Two questions. I think the first is for Jim, just to pick up on something that was said earlier around, you know, evidence gaps. Where are they widest, I guess? You know, and where would you sort of place priority in getting evidence at this point? And the second is more, I think, general for the panel. to understanding more about the degree to which families are engaged. We've talked a lot about youth as the point of engagement or intervention. What are we learning about broader family engagement in this endeavor?
Why don't we take the next question as well, so everyone can have a seat, and then we'll answer them both.
You took away all my preparation time.
Oh, dear.
First, I'd just like to put something into the mix on the question of jobs at higher stages of the value chain. I'm Phil Silas with RTI International. 2 years ago, we released some pretty unusual research that we had conducted with Duke University Center for Globalization, Governance, and Competitiveness. And one of the 4 global case studies is on global value chain upgrading in the fresh fruit and vegetable industry, horticulture. And its link with workforce development. And so we defined the stages of upgrading, the job requirements, the training strategies that are in use in some successful cases. And I just put it out. I tweeted the link to that yesterday, and anybody who'd like to get a hold of that, I think it's a useful baseline. It's certainly not the end of the story, but we very much agree that production agriculture isn't where the story is, and that whether it's in dairy or commodities, if there's another opportunity, people take it immediately. So let's not condemn youth to the hardest part. Exploring agro-entrepreneurship seems like a great idea to me. And so that leads me to my question, which is, how do you all see, one of the successful models in the US that's professionalized the agricultural discipline is this idea of all aspects of the industry training, especially through Future Farmers of America and 4-H. I mean, those stand out as some of the most outstanding exemplars of vocational training systems that have ever been developed anywhere and are still at that level. I'm curious if you can talk to me a little bit about your program experience with doing sort of explicitly all aspects training, if there is any, and how that might kind of inform, because we're running separate tracks between enterprise and workforce development, but I think I'm curious about your experience with integrative models that really provide sort of the wraparound and how that scales in the different contexts you work in.
Great, thank you. Well, I think I'm going to turn to Jim for the first question on evidence.
Yes, to
Where are the
Mark.
biggest gaps?
I think what we're suggesting that we focus on is, well, you can see from the interest in this conference and the general orientation of many of the presentations and the interventions is that many people see a kind of an entrepreneurial approach as being quite fundamental to this engagement of young people in the agri-food sector. And the whole nicely summed up in this idea of from job seekers to job creators. It's a wonderful phrase. The question is, what's behind it? Where are the examples that, and are those examples of very particular situations and very particular individuals? Or are there examples of more general approaches that are in some sense scalable, where impact is gained in a fairly broad way? And that's where we want to put, where we're suggesting that the heart of this evidence gathering exercise is to focus on the many different entrepreneurial approaches, some of them undertaken by NGOs, some of them undertaken by government, many supported now by government policy. And to really try to understand in what situations and what kinds of implemented in what kinds of ways do those approaches pay off for particular kinds of individuals, going back to difference. There's a lot of differences in there. And our suspicion is if we start to understand those differences better, then we're going to be much better placed to design both policy and programs. And maybe I'm just going to add a little caveat to that. I'm a researcher. I work in an academic institution. And I know, because I've also worked in the development practitioners, with development practitioners, I know that academics are often accused of essentially being complexifiers, getting buried in our own complexity. And here I am talking about difference on various scales and complexity. And I can see maybe some of you saying, oh God, would he just shut up and let us get on with the job? But I think we have to, in this particular case, we have to pay attention to complexity. Because this is the stuff, the differences amongst young people, differences amongst rural areas, different kinds of jobs. That's the stuff of life. That's the stuff around which people make decisions of what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. Are they going to work in the rural area? Are they going to go to the city? And unless we understand that, and we start to incorporate those understandings into our programming, we might as well just go home.
Thank you.
I'm not disagreeing with complexity, but one of the again back to where technology can be helpful. One of our small projects in sort of northwestern Ghana, north central Ghana, is it's kind of like a Costco swipe card, so that the farmer every intervention is tracked, and when they come and buy inputs or bring the output to the buying company. But so what happens is you get finally, because we've never known, we really don't know what drives productivity. We wish we did, but we don't. Could be good weather, whatever. But we will now have, through this repeatable, simple exercise, a very complex analysis of admittedly one community. But it's going to tell us a lot more over time than we've ever known in the past. And so, you know, and it's also going to tell us things about, well, it's not, in this case, it's not about cocoa. They're really spending more time and energy on cassava or plantain or what have you. So we'll have a more holistic, more complex view of what we traditionally saw as a fairly simplistic, straightforward thing, which of course it isn't.
And then I'd like to touch on Mark's question about family, and just to maybe, Catherine, if you could speak a little bit. How are the families of the young women, how are they involved in their, you know, the education, and also, you know, what kind of reactions? Because a lot of what you're doing is maybe challenging traditional ideas, and I'm just curious about your thoughts on that answer, or your answer to that question.
Sure, absolutely. And I think this is a really important point, thinking particularly from the focus of young women, whether thinking about agriculture or rural development more generally. Because of course one thing is most of the resources are in the hands of men. If you think about who has the control, the power over the use of land, the use of water, who has access even to the time of agriculture extension officers is predominantly men. And so changing that norm, you can't do that just by talking to women alone and just by working with women alone. And that's a fundamental pillar of our approach at CamFed, is that we work with the whole community. We really make sure that men, as well as women, are champions of this approach. So we work with the traditional leaders and the chiefs and the faith-based leaders and the local representatives of government. And we work with family members. And so I was talking about Berkisu earlier on the Innovation Bursary Program, and another young woman on that program is Aisha. And she has been inspired to form a cooperative of shea butter producers in her community to improve the standards of production, to help illiterate women to not get taken advantage of by middlemen because they can't read the weighing scales, and to sort of join together so they can secure a better price and produce a better quality product. And one of the things I was really struck by was the approach of her husband, Al Hassan. And I think one of the things we did which really made a difference is he was part of the process of that training program that Aisha was invited to. He was at the orientation along with other husbands and fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters, and he was part of the celebration of his wife's successes. He actually said afterwards, you know, it's unknown, you know, for men in my community to look after the children, but now Aisha's so busy with the business, I look after the children after school. And actually, you know, Aisha's helped me with applying some of the business advice she's learned to my own business. And us as a family, we've benefited. And so I think if we're going to support young people to lead this rural development in a way that's equal and fair and fulfills the potential of women as well as men, I think it's really important to engage the whole family in that process and to bring the men in as co-sort of champions of that process as well.
Thank you. Don't know, anyone have any other points to add on that? Maya, any comments on family and the importance of engaging the whole family?
In our part of the world, we would approach the family business in a different way. Usually when it comes to agriculture and business, family business and agriculture, they usually sort of distribute roles among each other. And even you would see the elder people, they have their own role, even while sitting at home, or they can sort of contribute to the work itself. So usually, at least in our own experience, we see the family as a supportive part in the business, in the agricultural business. I would like to add one more thing regarding the security or feeling that agricultural business is secure. Back also in Lebanon, unfortunately, we kind of have this, we are a little bit scared from the agricultural business, given that we don't have any security afterwards, because while you're getting older and you're not able anymore to sort of work yourself on the ground, there's nothing, there's no other alternative, or there's no other source of income. And it happens actually in my village. And now that the youth, they are kind of taking care of the lands of the elder people, and they sort of, the income, whatever income generated, they sort of distributed between the owner of the land and themselves. So although it kind of create good opportunities for young people to increase their income, however, unfortunately, when older people, when somehow in 10 years from now they will get older and they will not be able to take care of all the land they are taking care of now, they would find themselves with no source of income. So it's very important also when we talk about sustainability and in agribusiness, it's also important to sort of think ahead in the future what's going to happen. Those young people, they are not going to stay young forever, and they need sort of to secure their future, or to sort of save at least for their aging part of life. So it's one of the main challenges also in.
Great, thank you. How about we move to Phil's question? He was talking about training and the need for holistic wraparound training, using the 4-H example. And I think, I mean, from our point of view, we've been looking a fair bit at the foundation in terms of what can we do more to support our engagement in supporting rural youth, but also through our other programs to support agricultural finance. And one of the key findings that we've come across, and obviously it's not news to most people here, is that there really is a real disconnect in the training and the capacity building, particularly through a lot of the technical vocational schools. And there's a mismatch between what the market is demanding and what's actually being supplied through the various training providers. And so we're looking at opportunities to try to bridge that gap. But I don't know if anyone has any additional comments on that, the importance of training and capacity building, particularly for young people starting at an early age.
An example, well, not really a comment, but one thing that's been kind of interesting to us is the production livelihood side of the training is being nicely complemented by education. So what's happening is the school learning labs will be adjunct to elementary schools during the day, primary schools during the day, so the computers and whatnot are there. And then at night and on the weekends, the older adults will use it for vocational training. So you sort of get maximum efficiency out of 6 or 7 computers in a town.
Thank you. You've been standing for a while, so thanks for your patience.
Sure. David Feige with Making Sense. I guess I have something that's part comment, part question. And that's in a lot of the work that we've done with young people. We've recognized a lot of young people who treat agriculture as sort of a temporary activity or temporary livelihood, often with the objective of achieving something else, maybe further educational pursuits that will lead to something different. It's my own sense that I think the programming that we do in this space probably needs to recognize that nuance, that we're not necessarily talking about a career, but it might be a temporary activity. And I wondered if the panel would mind addressing that.
I think you did right, David. We've done work with, for example, with tomato producers in Brong-Ahafo in Ghana, where there's the potential, if you live near a river, using hand irrigation, there's the potential to grow up to 3 crops of tomatoes a year. And if you work very hard and if you're lucky and things are on your side, you can make a considerable amount of money. You can put together enough capital in a couple of years to build a little house, get married, and establish a non-farm business. And we followed young men who were, largely young men who were doing this. And sure enough, their stated goal, by and large, was to get out of agriculture. So you do agriculture in a way that allows you to get out of agriculture. And we coined the little term instrumental agriculture. I'm doing this for a very particular reason, and largely it was to build a kiosk or to get involved in hairdressing or to sell clothes or to migrate to Libya at the time. And you're correct. We have to keep that in mind, because if we start thinking about it's all about long-term sustainable management, and you're talking about sustainability of natural resource management to people who only want to be there for 1 or 2 years, the mismatch is really quite important. And so to understand that some people will get in, be involved in agriculture, and get out. They may come back later on in life. And that pattern is also quite well established, where people return to the village after having done other things, invest in agriculture in a different way. But there are many ways of engaging, and over the life cycle, people get involved in many different ways, in many different patterns.
Yeah, I guess one of the main challenges now, especially that the campus is addressing the role of technology and the role of young people in the rural areas. I guess we should keep in mind one main challenge or big challenge, at least for the years to come, that with access to technology, with access to higher source of income, with access to education and all the life resources, people will be exposed and aspiring and seeking for better opportunities and better quality of life. So we will be facing a big challenge, how to keep people really interested in agriculture, and how to at least offer or show that agriculture could be seriously a good source of income and good source for a better life, for a good lifestyle. So the more the people are exposed further to whatever is happening around them, and seeing that other youth would have might have better opportunities than them, they will seek also themselves they will become more ambitious. So it's really a big challenge how to keep working on representing the agriculture as a seriously one of the best businesses in the world in the future.
But I'm agreeing with all this, but I do think that the next 20 years in terms of economic growth and will be very, very interesting. I mean, somebody mentioned the agricultural capacity of Africa having been undertapped. There's resources, there's companies like Hershey see it as a growth market. So I don't, who knows what will happen, but there's possibility that the next 25 years are going to look significantly different than the previous, and that's going to have, those macro forces are going to have a big impact on these very personal issues we're talking about. And I'm sure no one has an answer to that, but it's worth keeping that in mind.
Absolutely, and I think that builds upon the whole issue of difference. I mean, the opportunities for young tomato farmers, needing that quick income source is you can't be a short-term cocoa farmer. I mean, it's a very different type of environment. So, difference as well in terms of value chain and crop is going to be very important as well.
Lindsay, may I add to that?
Sure, certainly.
I was just going to add, I think it's also really important we don't try and build too much of a framework here. I mean, one of the things we've learned at CamFed when we were going to young women with what we thought were great business ideas in agriculture and elsewhere is it only really works, and I think this is probably a universal truth around the world, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to be passionate about it personally. It's got to be something you personally believe in and you see the opportunity for and you're driven to do for whatever reason. And I think we can do various things that sort of showcase how attractive agriculture is as an option, and we can put initiatives in place to support that, but ultimately the choice is going to be with the young person, and some people will choose to move on, and I don't think that's the problem. I think we should be quite realistic about that and recognize it's about creating more opportunities, not constraining them.
Absolutely, opportunities and choice.
Yeah.
Yes. Please come to the, could you go to the microphone actually, please? Sorry, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Situ Akibode from Michigan State University. I'm basically from Togo. I have, a question, something that's already mentioned by Anne, I think, that youth don't want to go farming. I used to be teacher in Togo, University of Lomé, and in some 2 years vocational schools. Then when we talk to the youth about going to the rural area, because there are many opportunity over there, if they organize themselves very well, they say, no, I don't want to be like my fathers, my parents, who have seen suffer for just farming. They don't see, agriculture like, the future for their life. That's the first thing. Then what we see people that are already wealthy. They are public servants, they have their business, or they've gone abroad. They got money. They are the one who invests in agriculture, if I refer to my country specifically. They know they have the network. They know they're going to cultivate this and sell it maybe to restaurants, to hotels, and then they make good money out of that. And then my question has always been, how do we have those youth, have some interest into agricultural sector? Because anyway, there are opportunity over there, but we have to show them that they can do it this way or this other way, to make their life out of it. And my second, thing is, how do we connect people that are no longer, young people, but they are public servants, they have money, they are investing over there. How do we connect them to the youth that's still hesitating in going to that area of agriculture? Thank you.
Thank you. And how about we take the 2 questions? And if maybe I'll just do a last call, given that
Thank you
we're
for the
near.
opportunity. I'm Ernest Edu from Ghana Cooperative Credit Union, and I share the experience that Madam gave about Asha and that of, I know of them, at least I've been traveling to the northern Ghana. But I'm from the central part of Ghana. My issue is, in the village, there is an issue with land ownership. Sometimes you come from a family that do not own the land, and you are youth, you want to go into agriculture in the community. I quite remember maybe 10 years ago when I finished my senior high, I was trying to do some small farming. And I just entered they showed me a portion, but later on, it came out that the other family was telling me that I've entered into their portion. So I was stopped by doing that. So it means all that toil, the sweat that I put in over there just went wasted. So the question I'm asking is that as policymakers, as donors, how are we ensuring that youths in the rural areas can be able to own lands through negotiation, through the families? And also, how are we going to ensure that there's going to be demarcation of proper use of land? Maybe we've been able to educate the community that this place is good for this by you, the agriculture experts, being able to do the test on the ground for them to be able to know, share with them with the information that this place, it is good for us as a community to use it for this, so that at least for 20 years we'll be able to get something from it in terms of food production. Then also information. The information that we have in our community, it is complex. Sometimes our people they don't understand. So I believe that we should be able to abridge the information that we put out there for people to know, as my brother said, so that we could be able to connect ourselves to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And how about we take the last question here?
Hi, I'm Steve from the MasterCard Foundation. My question's for Andrew. Andrew, what advice do you have for some of the nonprofit agencies who are looking to engage with the private sector around practices or approaches that you've seen that are effective when you're talking to people within your organization, perhaps your boss or perhaps a CEO, when they're trying to make either a business case or a social value case to you that will help you make the case within your own company and have more effective public-private partnerships? How can nonprofit agencies communicate to you in the most effective and efficient way possible? Thanks.
Great, so we've got some interesting questions there. How about we start with C2's, how do we increase interest in the sector by youth? I think we've touched on that a fair bit already. But also welcome any ideas about how to connect youth to others who are already investing in the sector. So I don't know if anyone has any comments. Oh, sorry.
Check my one question.
Okay, sure, certainly. Sorry, I
before you
didn't see
begin.
there.
Hi, my name's Lassie Freeman. Excuse me. Just independent, here to learn and get more education on global youth economic development. My question was going to be on land rights too. You know, we have this huge agricultural discussion, but no mention of land rights or water rights. And so I was interested in what can we do from a policy perspective. You mentioned what can be done on the ground, but what also has, you know, what people can do. But what can we do as policymakers on a larger setting to kind of make it an conducive environment? It seems like there's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog here, trying to make it attractive. As an economist, it seems like the market makes it attractive. If there's money in it, the people will come.
Yeah, you know, since I live in Pennsylvania, I'm sensitive to this, but the image of the American farmer in the 30s was a sharecropper, right? Today, the image of the American farmer is someone driving a $275,000 combine, you know, more wired to Wall Street than Wall Street, knowing exact moment that prices are changing, so they're planning. So so in 2 generations, you have a completely different, and you have, you know, in where we live, you have 40–50% fewer farmers. You know, you have huge farms now. It's very high tech, and you know, the land rights issue there is obvious.
Yeah, I'm being given signals that I'm going to wrap it up, and I know we're keeping everyone from coffee. Just a few comments from our point of view. You know, absolutely, the land rights and land ownership is a big issue. We found that in some of the preliminary research for some of our programs. You know, the opportunities most available to young people are in poultry or smaller scale stuff because they don't get access to the land for actual productive activities or crop growing. I think it's varying, you know, across the continent, and so there's, you know, again, difference is important and we can't generalize. I would completely agree it's an issue. I think one of the challenges here is we don't have a lot of policymakers. You know, we're a lot of practitioners, we're funders, but we need to really ensure that this issue is being discussed. And I know that there are big efforts underway across the continent of varying degrees of success to actually start to address this. And even in our own work with Opportunity International, one of the key components that we found is if we even just demarcate the farmer's land in order to just be able to lend to it in an effective way, that has a huge impact in terms of starting to get the discussions about, okay, well, can we move forward on some of the land right issues? Just wondering if anybody has any additional things to add. Maybe if you could just touch on Steve's points as well, Andy?
Basically on the NGOs, it's a good question. I would say 2 things. Understand the values and areas of interest of the company, because you know, we don't want to duplicate what somebody else is doing, so we're all trying to find the unique platform that resonates with what we do as a business and how we think about the world as a company. And then it won't be any surprise, but you know, we have to go in front of our leadership with plan, metric, outcome to get money. So if you can do that with us, that's really, really helpful. And these things are difficult to quantify, but really pay attention to the M&E learnings that are emerging, and that will help you, that will help us.
Thank you. I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank everyone and thank you all for the questions. This has been a really interesting discussion, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you all very much.